Welcome to War and Untold Stories. Here, we explore the hidden side of history. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. From the ashes of the Second World War, a new world order was forged, but old colonial ambitions died hard. In the dense, humid jungles of Southeast Asia, a nation named Vietnam, yearning for independence after centuries of foreign rule, found itself at the epicenter of a global ideological struggle. This is the story of that struggle, a tragedy written in the jungle, a conflict that would define a generation and leave scars on the soul of two nations. It is the story of the Vietnam War. Our story begins in 1945. Ho Chi Minh, a charismatic nationalist and communist leader, declares Vietnam's independence from French colonial rule, quoting the American Declaration of Independence in the streets of Hanoi. He hoped for support from the United States, a nation born from its own revolution. But the Cold War was dawning, and the world was being carved into spheres of influence. Fearful of communism's spread, Washington chose to back France's efforts to reclaim its colony. The First Indochina War had begun. The promised elections never happened. Diem, with American support, refused to participate, fearing a certain victory for Ho Chi Minh. The temporary dividing line hardened into a fortified border, a flashpoint for a new, more brutal war. The United States, guided by the domino theory, the belief that if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would follow, deepened its commitment to South Vietnam. Military advisors were sent, their numbers swelling from a few hundred to over 16,000 by 1963. In the South, Diem's corrupt and repressive regime fueled popular discontent, creating fertile ground for the Viet Cong, a southern-based communist guerrilla force supplied by the North. The jungle became their sanctuary, the night their ally. They moved like ghosts, laying traps, launching ambushes, and melting back into the landscape, indistinguishable from the local populace. The turning point came in August 1964. They were young men, most barely out of their teens, sent to a country they couldn't find on a map. They expected a conventional war, but found something else entirely. This was a war without fronts, without clear battle lines. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. They fought not just a visible army, but the jungle itself, the suffocating heat, the torrential monsoons, the razor-sharp elephant grass, the unseen threats lurking in the shadows. The M16 rifle, the Huey helicopter, and napalm became the iconic tools of this new kind of warfare. Massive search and destroy missions were launched. American troops would sweep through villages and jungles, trying to root out the Viet Cong. But victory was measured not in territory gained, but in a grim and often unreliable metric: the body count. This attrition strategy turned the war into a bloody stalemate. For every Viet Cong killed, another seemed to rise from the rice paddies to take their place. The sheer resilience of the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, who endured relentless bombing campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder, baffled American military planners. They were fighting for their homeland, a cause that fueled an almost unbreakable will to resist. Back in the United States, the war was broadcast into living rooms every night. For the first time in history, the brutal reality of combat was unvarnished. Images of napalmed villages, wounded soldiers, and grieving civilians fueled a growing anti-war movement. University campuses became centers of protest. Young people questioned the morality and purpose of the conflict. Chants of, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" echoed through the streets. The nation became deeply polarized. A credibility gap opened between the government's optimistic reports and the grim news footage. The shock came in January 1968. During the Tet holiday truce, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a massive coordinated surprise attack across more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. They even breached the walls of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, the Tet offensive was a disaster for the Communists, who suffered devastating losses. But politically and psychologically, it was a stunning victory. It shattered the illusion that the U.S. was winning the war. Public support plummeted. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted newsman in America, declared the war a stalemate. President Johnson, his political career in ruins, announced he would not seek re-election. Richard Nixon won the presidency in 1968 with a promise of peace with honor. His strategy was Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops while strengthening the South Vietnamese army to fight on its own. Yet, as he withdrew troops, he also expanded the war, ordering secret bombing campaigns and incursions into neighboring Cambodia and Laos to destroy enemy supply lines. The protests at home grew more intense, culminating in the tragic Kent State shooting in 1970, where National Guardsmen killed 4 student protesters. The nation's wounds were deepening. Peace talks in Paris dragged on for years. Finally, in January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. A ceasefire was declared, and the last American combat troops departed. For the U.S., the war was over. But for the Vietnamese, the fighting never truly stopped. Without the might of American air power, the South Vietnamese army was vulnerable. In the spring of 1975, the North launched its final decisive offensive. The South Vietnamese army collapsed with stunning speed. The world watched in disbelief as North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon on April 30th, 1975. The frantic, chaotic evacuation from the roof of the U.S. Embassy became the final indelible image of America's defeat. The long, bloody war was finally over. Vietnam was reunified under communist rule. The cost was staggering. Over 58,000 Americans lost their lives. More than 300,000 were wounded. For the Vietnamese people, the toll was catastrophic. Estimates range from 2 to 3 million dead, countless more wounded, and a land scarred by bombs and chemical defoliants like Agent Orange, whose poisonous legacy lingers to this day. The Vietnam War was a tragedy of miscalculation, of cultural ignorance, and of political hubris. It taught America the painful limits of its power and forced a national reckoning with its role in the world. For Vietnam, it was the final, brutal chapter in a long struggle for sovereignty. The jungle, once a theater of war, has grown back, slowly covering the bomb craters and bunkers. But the memories remain. The echoes of this tragedy in the jungle remind us of the profound human cost of conflict and the enduring universal desire for peace and self-determination. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this documentary meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories from our shared past.